Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about why so many people are confused about the Duskbloods. We were supposed to get the Duskbloods Network test this weekend, but there has been a cancellation. Does that mean a cancellation for the entire series of play sessions throughout the weekend, or just this first one? And because we haven't gotten a chance to play through the Duskbloods ourselves, we only have minimal information about the game that has come from previews just recently. But from these previews, different things have been said, and it's leading some people perhaps a bit astray as to what to expect from the Duskbloods. Is this more of a PvP-focused kind of game, or does it truly also cater to people who are more into the player versus enemy? There's some confusion there. And then, of course, because this is an exclusive title to Nintendo Switch 2, and because this is coming from Software, who is known for putting out games on various platforms, a lot of people are crying foul, a lot of people are upset, a lot of people are wondering if this will eventually make it over to other platforms, and so there's some confusion there too. Today what I would like to do is do my best to shed some light on all of these different issues regarding the Duskbloods. So that's what we're getting into today. But before continuing, let me ask that if you find yourselves enjoying my videos, and if you haven't subscribed already, to please subscribe. So earlier this morning, during what would have been the first play session, the official From Software PR page on Twitter said this: "We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience caused to those who are waiting for the Duskbloods Network test due to game server issues. We regret to inform you that today's session is now closed. We will continue to work on improving the servers and will announce future schedules at a later date." So what we know with 100% certainty right now is that there will not be any more sessions for today, or at least the first session. That's not happening. That part is obvious already. Now, what is to come with the other sessions that were planned for this weekend? That's where there's not total clarity right now. There hasn't been any other updates made by From Software at this point. This is the latest one. What I will note, though, is that they say here at the end they will announce future schedules, as in plural, more than one, at a later date. And so I do think that is indicative that they are going to be announcing multiple play sessions at a different time. And so that could mean the entire weekend of play sessions that we were going to be able to enjoy, we no longer will be able to, which would be pretty disappointing. Of course, at this point, we don't know with total certainty. But I think what we need to keep in mind here is that this is a network test. This is the point of the network test, to test things out, to make sure everything's going to be working for when the final version of the game comes out, hopefully later this year, even though we don't have a set release date yet. As pointed out by Player Essence on Twitter, this is not the first time we've seen issues during a network test by From Software. For Elden Ring Night Rain, they had to issue an apology for some pretty big server issues. So this isn't anything too out of the ordinary here. Now, yeah, it's pretty disappointing that we won't be able to play the Duskbloods today. I'm still holding out hope that somehow we'll be able to play a little bit of the Duskbloods this weekend, but at this point, we don't know. But I'll be staying on top of it. I'll make sure to update you guys as soon as I know. I'll post something in the community page, or if you follow me on Twitter, I'll retweet what's going on the moment I know there. But that's where we're at right now with the network test. But at this point, we still don't know everything there is to know about the Duskbloods. One, because we haven't gotten a chance to play through the network test, but also two, the network test is just a part to the game, and from what we understand of recent previews, that's what we would have been playing. And so with these previews, we're still not learning the full picture. However, some people in their previews learned a little bit more than others. So if you've been paying attention to some of the previews that I talked a little bit about yesterday, there was a lot of talk about the overall structure of the Duskbloods when it comes to these different matches. And basically the way it works, the goal is to acquire as many virtue points as possible. And you can acquire virtue points by exploring around, finding different things in the environment, engaging in player versus enemy events, or player versus player events. And there's a lot of variety there. But if you don't have enough virtue points by the second phase of the match, the bottom two of the 8 playing will be eliminated, and then by the end of the third phase, only the top 3 will remain for the final phase, the Blood Bestowal, where in the previews they talked about how it was a 3-way deathmatch. And so from this, a lot of people have grown concerned that there's too much of a player versus player focus in the Duskbloods, but other previews have indicated that it won't just be player versus player deathmatches at the end, but also player versus enemy. And a point I've tried to make is that Miyazaki, the main person responsible behind the Duskbloods here, has said this multiple times in different ways in different interviews, but he said this one most recently in an IGN interview that just came out. Personally, I am not very great at these high-intensity action games and things like PvP, player versus player. So, at the start, the audience really is just myself while thinking about how I would go at this. Are there systems in place that I would enjoy that cater to me as a player, not being someone who's really into that intense PvP? And so this is coming from Miyazaki, who's behind the Duskbloods here. If those are his own feelings on this, I think this conversation about how the Duskbloods might be too player versus player focused could be a bit misguided. We've learned a lot about the Duskbloods, how there's actually various ways to progress. You don't necessarily have to be really good at taking out fellow players. You can form alliances, you can acquire virtue points by exploring around, you can acquire virtue points by fighting enemies, NPCs, teaming up with others. And there are various different types of classes with different types of skills that aren't all necessarily all about focusing on player versus player encounters. You can use your abilities to your advantage to progress in different ways. And even within this final phase here, where it's a deathmatch between the final three, because it's 3 and not 1v1, it's not a typical player versus player situation. Even if you're not very good at taking out fellow players, if you can work with the other player involved, you might be able to find a way to win. Now, does that mean you'll be at a disadvantage in these situations if you're not really good at this stuff? Yeah. But the point is, you will have options here, and then there will be other situations where it won't just be a player versus player situation, but a player versus enemy situation. We do not know everything there is to learn about the Duskbloods yet. There is more to this game. And what's actually really exciting to me about this game is that there seems to be so many different ways to go about playing this game and finding ways to win, which I believe is the intent by Miyazaki here. So this whole conversation where there's a lot of concern that there's too much of a focus on player versus player, I feel like there's a lot of reason to think that there's a lot of other ways to succeed here, so I think we should just hold back on drawing conclusions until we learn a little bit more. But another common talking point surrounding the Duskbloods is if this game will stay exclusive to Nintendo Switch 2. And it's hard to say with total certainty, but what I will say is that this game was made for Nintendo Switch 2, initially was planned for Nintendo Switch 1, and From Software and Nintendo have worked together on this. Nintendo's been very involved with the process here, the creative process here, and they are publishing this title. We actually just learned something very interesting about Nintendo's involvement with this game. IGN. Following up on this being a Switch 2 exclusive, is there more you can share about how and why you went with Nintendo? A little bit more detail about how the partnership came about? I know you said that you pitched this and it's pretty much the idea from the start. Miyazaki. In terms of the reason that we initially decided to go with Nintendo, we had an opportunity to discuss the idea for the game with them, and I think they seemed very excited and very receptive to the idea. They seemed very forward-thinking in terms of how to do it, before considering the business aspect of it. That alone was something that I found very appealing and gave me a lot more reassurance for moving forward with this. Of course, this game isn't out yet, so there are more things to consider, but in terms of the relationship currently and how we think it's going, up until this point, the systems and the overall rule set of the game are very unique, and I think having someone who can constantly give us feedback, support, and additional ideas, and the balancing first of all, because these features are quite complex and difficult. Having this relationship is definitely key to that. Also, with the complexity of the systems, the onboarding of tutorials and making sure players understand how the game works and how to succeed in the game is something we've historically not been super great at conveying instantly. We've definitely just dropped players in and hoped they would figure it out. In this case, Nintendo is definitely the right partner for better conveying that information in a way that is understandable to the player. It definitely suits their strengths. And so Nintendo was actually highly involved with this project here. I don't think this is exactly like a Bayonetta situation though, where Nintendo came in and saved the IP, and so in the case of Bayonetta, Bayonetta 2 and 3 are only available on Nintendo. This could possibly be a situation similar to Monster Hunter Rise, where it was made exclusively for the Nintendo Switch and eventually was brought over to PC. There is that possibility here. But I don't think there's any realistic scenario where the Duskbloods will be brought over to PlayStation or Xbox. Best case scenario for those who do not want to pick up a Nintendo Switch 2 is that eventually it'll make its way over to PC. That's the best case scenario, But I wouldn't be totally surprised if it never comes to PC, because this was made exclusively for Nintendo Switch 2, and Nintendo has been highly involved with this project. But what do you all think? What do you make of these issues regarding the network test, and how different people feel about what we've learned so far about the Duskbloods? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.